Welcome back. This is AMK, and we're at part 14 of my series about the Benoit murders, where we're looking at the actual police files and the evidence that they gathered during their investigation. In this video, we're going to take a look at the DNA evidence that they gathered and the testing results of what they found. This one's tricky. I have a lot of talking and explaining I have to do to get my point across, so without any further delay, let's just get right into it. Now, the next part right after that in Detective Harper's report is the poison determination. On July 17, 2007, the Georgia Bureau of Investigation's Crime Lab released the results of additional toxicology testing referred to as a poison determination report. So I'm writing this down right now, and this poor lady at the Georgia of Investigation's Open Record Division, she is going to get so annoyed with me because I'm going to send another request requesting the poison determination report. Maybe in those reports, I will get more information about the GHB, the testosterone, so I'm going to do that. But this says the testing was performed on blood samples from Nancy Benoit and Chris Benoit. Testing was also performed on blood and urine samples from Daniel Benoit. The poison determination testing was done to check the samples for any significant quantity of gamma hydroxybutyric acid, or GHB. Gamma hydroxybutyric acid, GHB, is naturally occurring in the human body in very small amounts. The synthetic form of the drug is used by some bodybuilders since it is believed to lower blood glucose levels that in turn causes the body to release growth hormones. The drug, which has been referred to as a date rape drug, has also been used to create feelings of euphoria or intoxication. Larger doses can cause unconsciousness and death. The reports for Nancy Benoit, Daniel Benoit, and Chris Benoit advised the crime lab found no significant quantity of gamma hydroxybutyric acid, GHB. No significant quantity. I'm not sure if that means that there was some detected, but it wasn't at a level significant enough to be noteworthy or high enough to play a role in these deaths. I don't know. Hopefully when I get this document from the GBI, I can find the answers to these questions. I already did request all post-mortem toxicology reports, but I didn't get anything that shows these urine results or anything showing any elevated level of testosterone like I was talking about in the previous video, so I don't know why that is. Maybe I need to specifically request the document by name, so all I can do is try again. But we do have some other documents we can dig through for now. We have some DNA evidence to look at, and we have a report from Identigene and Expertox to look at. If I get any more documents from the Georgia Bureau of Investigations about this poison determination, I will edit that in here after this so that you can see it immediately following the summary. But for now, we're just going to move on to the DNA summary part of Detective Harper's report. Alright, so we're still in Detective Harper's case summary, and we're at his summary of the DNA evidence testing. Now, this first sentence here just cracks me the hell up. Due to the fact that the Georgia Bureau of Investigation's Crime Lab could not allocate the time to test DNA evidence in this case, it was decided to pay a private lab to perform DNA analysis. Now, this gets me because I do a lot of research into all kinds of things, and it is my experience through my research that anytime a private company is called in to perform the duties of a government agency, it's never a good thing. There's usually money being exchanged off the record, and a corrupt system can usually be uncovered where the government is either pocketing money from the private company, either like through lobbying groups or through campaign donations, and then the government is in a sense beholden to that company anytime work needs to be outsourced, or the other way around, whereby if the private company wants to be considered for government grants or funding for research projects, then that company is basically owned by the government and has to follow specifications set by the government, and the private company basically can no longer operate privately, even though they still may function as such in the public domain. If you watch where the money flows, you can tell what's really going on. And yeah, financial disclosure reports and foreign agent registry, or FARA reports, are publicly released documents. And so are stock earnings of members of Senate and Congress Not many people know that, but I tell you, it sure is interesting to see which members of our government have recently purchased stocks in corporations such as, I don't know, Lockheed Martin prior to this war we have going on now, or bought stock in Pfizer right before the C-19 pandemic hit, almost like they had a bit of prior knowledge as to what was coming down the pike, so to speak. But yeah, I'm sure that's all purely coincidental. They were elected to work for us, so I'm sure that's all they do all day is figure out how to make life better for us, right? But all that aside, just the fact that this was a pretty high-profile case and the Georgia Bureau of Investigation Crime Lab just could not find the time to test the DNA evidence, that's a pretty huge red flag to me. And I want to know, why were they so busy that they couldn't make time to do their job at the crime lab, that they had to pay a private lab? I'm going to look more into this private lab. I'm going to look into who owns it. You have to look at who sits on the board of directors because they have a lot of influence. You have to look at the donations they take in, from what groups they're taking it from. If they have shares of stock that they sell, you have to look at who owns the majority of the shares of stock. There's so much you have to look into if you want to know what's really going on, because that's where things get really dark and dirty, when you start following where the money goes. But enough of that, I'm getting distracted. So, for whatever reason, like I just said, they paid a private lab to do the DNA analysis. And when you see what this is, this gets really interesting. The private lab, Identigene, which is in Houston, Texas. So it's not even in the same state, not in the state of Georgia. They had to ship it out, which means who knows how was it delivered? How were these samples delivered? How secure was it, is what I'm saying. So this private lab, Identigene from Houston, Texas, was selected. Just the wording of this freaking gets me. The private lab was selected to perform the analysis. They were selected. Who selected them? These are all very important questions, and people don't think to ask these questions. They're just like, oh, okay, well, they were selected, so they must have been the best one to do the job. That doesn't necessarily mean that. Who selected them to perform this analysis, and why were they selected to perform the analysis? Those are two very important questions. But let's see what this says here. We're already off to a great start, and my voice is already getting high-pitched in disbelief, so this should be a lot of fun. The items sent to the lab include the sock and tape located in the kitchen trash, as well as the white towel that was found wrapped around Chris Benoit's neck. Also sent for testing were the S-video cable, the coaxial cable, white cord, cloth tape, and power cord found on the body of Nancy Benoit. So this right here, the cloth tape, you'll be able to see later on when we actually look at the Identigene DNA testing, but this cloth tape is a very important piece of this DNA testing, and I have a lot of questions about how this tape was analyzed. But was this the tape that was located in the kitchen trash? Or was this the tape that was used to tape the towel around Benoit's neck? And if you don't know what I'm talking about that, then you should go back and watch my previous video. I think it was part 11, where we talked about the autopsy reports. And they said that the towel that was around Benoit's neck had been taped together. So we have that tape, and we have the tape that was around, like the gag that was around Nancy's head. And also the tape that is around, I think, her ankles. That's going to be really, really important. We need to know, was this the tape? I know it clearly says here the sock and tape located in the kitchen trash, as well as the white towel. But we also learned that there was tape around that white towel. So it's really important, I think, for what we're going to learn here to know where that cloth tape came from. The way that it says here, it says it was all found on the body of Nancy Benoit. But it's going to be really interesting, that cloth tape. So keep that in mind. Let me get rid of these marks now so they're not in the way as we read through here further. But I do want to keep that there. Okay. Blood samples from Nancy and Chris Benoit were sent as reference samples to compare to any DNA profiles obtained from the evidence samples submitted. On Friday, October 26, 2007, Identigene released their findings in reference to DNA analysis on the evidence submitted. Identigene stated the reference samples of blood produced full profiles to compare to the evidence. It was noted that the blood sample provided for Nancy Benoit showed significant signs of DNA degradation. Okay, so they got full DNA profiles to compare the evidence. But note, the blood sample for Nancy Benoit showed significant signs of DNA degradation. So, sketchy. Testing produced a full male DNA profile on the white towel that was initially found around Chris Benoit's neck. Identigene advised the full male DNA profile matched the DNA profile for Chris Benoit from the reference sample. The frequency of this male profile being obtained from an unrelated individual chosen at random from the population at large is less than 1 in 610 quadrillion. Okay, so that's pretty much some pretty good evidence that the male DNA on the towel belonged to Chris Benoit. Testing on the cloth tape, which was found binding Nancy Benoit's ankles together, located a mixture of male and female DNA. Ooh, okay, this is where it gets good, so pay close attention here. Also, maybe I should preface this by saying I'm not an expert in DNA analysis or even anything close. So this is just all speculation and just common sense questions about what's going on here. The female DNA was a major and somewhat overwhelming component of the sample and was consistent with the reference sample provided of Nancy Benoit. So see, now we're going to get into some word salad. Test results of the minor component of the mixture could not exclude Chris Benoit as the contributor. So let's review. We have a major and a minor component of DNA on the cloth tape around Nancy's ankles. We have a major component that belongs to Nancy Benoit. And we have a minor component that the wording here says cannot exclude Chris Benoit as the contributor. Now see, this is why DNA evidence sampling is, in my opinion, a little sketchy. It's promoted as like hardcore definitive results that DNA matches. But we get into situations like how it said right here, significant signs of degradation for whatever reason. I'm guessing decomposition played a role in that. And also the wording of these results here gets a little sketchy. It gives you wording like this. They could not exclude Chris Benoit as the contributor. Well, okay, by saying they can't exclude him as the contributor and wording it that way, it's sort of an underhanded way of telling you we can't prove that Chris Benoit is the male. That's what it's saying here. Think about it. If you're like, okay, let me try to illustrate what I'm thinking. So suppose somebody stole money from me and I don't know who it was, but imagine that Jane tells me she overheard Jessica say that if only she had the money, she'd buy, a new TV or whatever. Then Jessica buys a new TV. And when I call police to report my money stolen, I tell them, you should really look into Jessica. She probably stole it from me. Well, then the next thing that should be asked is police should ask me, do I have any evidence? Well, no, I don't have any evidence, but I can't exclude her because Jane told me she needed money and, well, she did just buy a new TV, so, we can't exclude her. That's probably a pretty shitty example of what I'm trying to explain here, but what I'm getting at is when you're saying you can't exclude something as a possibility, that's sort of, it's like a way of making it sound more credible than it is because you don't have enough evidence to say, like it says here, the female DNA was a major and somewhat overwhelming component of the sample and was consistent with the reference sample. Like I think that in this case here, why wouldn't they word it the same way if they were overwhelmingly sure that Chris Benoit was the male contributor of the DNA? Instead, they tell you we can't exclude him. So just keep all that in consideration as we go through here. Then it goes on to say, Identigene reported the profile found in the major component located in the DNA sample from cloth tape. And remember, the major component is the female DNA of Nancy Benoit. had a frequency in an unrelated individual chosen at random from the general population at large is less than 1 in 1 quintillion. So what they're talking about here, the major component, they're talking about this. Because right here it says the female DNA was a major and somewhat overwhelming component. So, and then here, where they're talking about they cannot exclude Benoit, that's the minor component. So, I mean, are you getting what I'm saying here? Do you see how the wording in this is overwhelmingly confusing? I mean, to take their word here, the overwhelming component of the sample. So the profile found in the major component had a frequency in an unrelated individual chosen at random is less than 1 in 1 quintillion. And you can see in the pictures I'm putting it's 1 quintillion pennies. And in this image, in the bottom right of the cube of pennies, that is the Empire State Building, the Eiffel Tower, and other buildings that give you a reference to the scale of the size of 1 quintillion pennies. And these illustrations from the Penny Project, the link is below, they're going to come in really handy for illustration purposes for how drastically different these numbers are as far as probability as to whether this is the individual related to the DNA. So they're saying that they know for sure that the female DNA, which is the major component, was Nancy. Now let me get rid of these things here, because then this next part here, which is confusing in the way this summary is written, because it makes one think, I know I did it first, I had to read through this a bunch of times, because it makes it seem like this here is related to this sentence about cannot exclude Chris Benoit. You see what I mean? Because they say the test results of the minor component could not exclude Chris Benoit. Then it goes on to say, we reported the profile found in its, it couldn't be just some individually chosen at random person. But then the next sentence says the reported minor component of the mixture showed the frequency in an unrelated individual chosen at random to be less than 1 in 2,800. And remember, that minor component is Chris Benoit's DNA. So we go from less than 1 in 610 quadrillion from the full profile, okay? And they're saying that it matched the DNA profile from the reference sample. And you can see on the screen right now an image of what 1 quadrillion pennies looks like. And that's only 1 quadrillion pennies. This says it was less than 1 in 610 quadrillion, that the DNA on the cloth that was around Chris Benoit's neck belongs to anybody other than Chris Benoit. All right? And then it says the major component belongs to Nancy Benoit, and the chances of it being anyone else is less than 1 in 1 quintillion. Then we have this minor component that could not exclude Chris Benoit as the contributor, and then we go down here to this paragraph. The reported minor component showed the frequency in an unrelated individual chosen at random to be less than 1 in 2,800. So we go from 610 quadrillion for the cloth around Benoit's neck to 1 in 1 quintillion for Nancy's DNA, which is the major component, for the cloth tape that was around Nancy's ankles, which had a mixture of male DNA, to, well, we can't exclude Chris Benoit as the contributor. And then they tell you that in the minor component, we have 1 in 2,800. That's crazy. I mean, this is insane. And then look, it even says, due to the mathematically lower number, and for clarification purposes, I contacted Identigene about the cloth tape results. So this whole thing even stood out to Detective Harper enough that he had to call and ask questions about this, and to make sure for clarification purposes that this was not a typo. I hope I, explained that somewhat clearly. I know, I don't know all the right terminology to use, but holy crap, this whole thing is a mess. So let's see, what did Identigene tell Detective Harper when he called to ask for clarification on this, I guess you could say, high probability that it would be an individual unrelated to Chris Benoit? So let's see. Detective Harper learned the major component of the DNA mixture was in such a higher concentration to that of the minor component. So again, please remember, the major component is Nancy. the minor component is Chris. So the major component was in such a higher concentration to that of the minor component, despite the fact that they note that Nancy's DNA was significantly degraded, that it overwhelmed the mixture during testing, and that's what caused the difference in ratio. What? Like, that doesn't even make sense to me, because picture Nancy's DNA like apples and Chris's DNA like oranges, and you're throwing it all together in a basket, which in this case, the basket would be like the cloth, okay? You're putting it in this basket, and you have more apples than you do oranges. Even though the apples are overwhelming the mixture, you should still be able to identify which is an orange and which is an apple, right? And if you take the time to do a more detailed analysis on those apples and oranges, you should be able to determine exactly how many apples and exactly how many oranges is in that mixture. I mean, am I right? Because I've never even heard this is a possibility, that if you have more DNA belonging to somebody in a mixture of other DNA, that it essentially weakens the other DNA. Then how can DNA evidence even be as conclusive as is implied in any courtroom ever? I mean, and maybe I'm thinking more about this than is necessary. I don't know. Maybe I'm completely misreading this. Maybe I don't understand this correctly. What do you think? Let me know in the comments below. But let's just keep reading here. Let me get rid of these. So, it was explained that the results were based more on the concentration of the sample and did not reflect the possibility that the minor component belonged to an individual unrelated to Chris Benoit. Okay. But then why would you word it this way? I don't know. I'm just going to pretend it makes sense so we can finish reading through this. A full female DNA profile was obtained from the black power cord, which had been placed over the cloth tape binding Nancy Benoit's ankles together. The profile from the power cord was consistent with the reference sample provided from Nancy Benoit, and the frequency of the major component of this profile existing in an unrelated individual chosen at random from the population at large is less than 1 in 1 quintillion. What the fuck? Okay, so we're back to the quintillions for sure that the major DNA component is definitely Nancy. And also notice it says that DNA profile is on the power cord that was on top of the tape that had the male minor component DNA that they're saying is Chris Benoit. So that's a bit interesting, isn't it? Identigene also reported that the same female DNA profile was obtained from the S-video cable, coaxial cable, white cord, and the sock and tape. Now, this sock and tape, that's a different piece of tape than the tape that was around Nancy's ankles. This sock and tape, that would be the makeshift gag and the tape that was around Nancy's head. The white cord was found tied tightly around the neck of Nancy Benoit. The S-video and coaxial cable was located binding Nancy Benoit's hands and was partially intertwined and connected to the white cord. The sock and tape was located in the kitchen trash. But notice how they're not pointing out that there was any male DNA on any of those items? The DNA profile on these items matched the reference sample submitted from Nancy Benoit. The report stated the frequency of this profile from an unrelated individual chosen at random from the population at large is less than 1 in 1 quintillion. Okay, so if I'm understanding this correctly, of the items Nancy was bound with, the only major DNA component is that of Nancy Benoit. And the only item with anyone else's DNA is the cloth tape around her ankles that had a minor DNA component of a male. And remember, that cloth with the male DNA was underneath the other bindings. And that male DNA was so overwhelmed by Nancy's DNA that they can only say that Chris Benoit cannot be excluded. And that the chance it was someone other than Chris Benoit is 1 in 2,800. That's a far cry from the 1 in however many quintillion that it's definitely Nancy's DNA, isn't it? So what the fuck is going on here? The only major DNA component on the items used to bind Nancy is Nancy's DNA? And now check out the wording in the next part here. Analysis performed by Identigene did not locate any DNA profiles in the evidence submitted that did not match or were at least consistent with the DNA profiles obtained from the Chris and Nancy Benoit reference samples. What does that even mean? Because it either matches or it doesn't, right? And we can see here in this summary that Nancy's DNA is definitely hers because there's a 1 in quintillions of a chance that it's anyone else's. So the quote, at least consistent with, end quote, part of this sentence has to be the diluted minor DNA component of Chris Benoit. You know, the one they said there was a 1 in 2,800 chance it could have been someone else. So I did a little math, and if we're comparing 1 quintillion to 2,800, here's the difference. When it comes to whether the minor DNA component is that of Chris Benoit, they might as well be saying, we're pretty sure it was. We're just going to go ahead and say it was. I just can't. I mean, are you guys seeing this the way I am? Let me finish reading through this before my head explodes. The testing results did not produce any evidence that an unrelated individual's DNA profile was contained in the evidence submitted. Okay, so they're ruling out anybody who is not related? Is that right? Is that what I'm reading there? Then it says neither Chris Benoit nor Nancy Benoit has identical twin siblings that could have contributed similar or consistent DNA profiles. Okay. And that's all that's here as far as the summary for the DNA testing. But I do have these documents from Identigene that Detective Harper was looking at when he prepared this summary. So we're going to go look at that now. But unfortunately, I'm going to end this here, and in the next video, we'll take a look at the Identigene DNA report. So thanks for watching. This has been AMK, and I'll see you in the next video. Bye!